I'm back. Mr. Clark's back. Time to take a look at the French Revolution. We're spending quite a bit of time on the French Revolution, so this will just be our kind of introductory lesson on the French Revolution. As we move forward, we'll be learning about uh, how France was divided for hundreds of years, the old order or the old regime in France as it was known. France was divided into three distinct classes, and we'll see the inherent unfairness amongst the classes. We'll look at the root causes of the French Revolution. We'll identify the major reforms that were enacted by the new National Assembly, including the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen. So first of all, what was the old regime in France, number one? System of government in France prior to the French Revolution, which had divided it up into three classes or three estates. When you look at the different estates in France, we have a couple of visuals here that'll help you as well. First estate was made up of the clergy, many of whom are enormously wealthy. There's two different types of clergy: those who are kind of in the countryside, who are kind of more your middle class, level members of the clergy, and then those who are the religious leadership for the nobility. They're really wealthy. They had more access to the government than did the common folk within the citizen. Church leaders often interfered in the government. So unlike what we think about with modern day churches, they kind of have a backseat, at least in terms of politics. That certainly was not the case during this period of time in history. And of course, they paid no taxes. The second estate included the nobility and had top jobs in the royal government. This, was kind of the wealthier members of society. And then once again, too, they didn't pay any taxes. So you see two groups here, both of whom were better off than the average citizen in France, and neither of which paid taxes. The third estate, since it made up 98% of the population, they had a diverse group of different type of people that are part of the third estate, most of whom did not live a life of wealth and privilege. They had little access to the government. You look at the little pyramid here, and the clergy was the smallest of the group, so that's why it's at the narrow point of the pyramid. So that's the first estate. The nobility was the second estate. The king, the queen, nobles of the sword, princes of royal blood, dukes, marquises, counts, viscounts, barons, knights, nobles of the robe. So all kinds of different nobility during that period of time. And the third estate included everybody else, included maybe like the upper middle class, lawyers and doctors, businessmen. You had merchants, soldiers, craftsmen, shopkeepers, peasants, and just about everybody else who made up society. So you see the little chart there on the right, the light blue being the clergy, the nobility being in kind of that, orangey color there. And then the green would represent the commoners or the third estate. So you can see, even though they only made up a very small fraction of the population, the land ownership was pretty significant for the nobility. They owned roughly 22% of the land throughout the church. Maybe about 1/3 of the land was owned by 2% of the population, and then the rest of the population, made up of everybody else, owned the rest of the land, but they paid all of the taxes. Okay, 3, explain the diversity of the third estate regarding income and occupation. The bourgeoisie. They were part of the third estate, the middle class. Many of these people were kind of the upper middle class, as I alluded to before: your doctors, attorneys, even your lawyers. They might be landowners. Most of the third estate, however, were rural peasants, people who worked the land and kind of got by on a week by week, month by month, year by year basis. There's also a segment of poor who lived in some of the cities. These are those who were most destitute or down on their luck. 4, how would the life of a member of the second estate be different from that of the third estate? Second estate were more privileged, enjoyed entertainment and leisure time. They really enjoyed and embraced life. Of course, too, they worked less or not at all. Third estate mostly made up of the peasants, as we mentioned, many of whom were poor. You look on the left side there, down the bottom. That is a member of the nobility, a member of the second estate. That's how they kind of dressed and looked, pretty fancy for that period of time. Okay, Looking at number 5, what reasons did the Third Estate use to push for social and economic changes in France? The Third Estate wanted the rest of France and the rest of French society to pay its fair share of taxes. Members of the Third Estate also wanted to enjoy the rights given to the other two classes. Really little political cartoon there at the bottom. You can see there the nobility, the clergy, and then the Third Estate, the gentleman on the ground. You see the two at the top there. You can see kind of a concerned look on their face because they were living in constant fear that the majority would rise up against them. You can see there the commoner on the ground there, weapons and other things there kind of gathering up. 6, why did many peasants riot in 1775? Well, this was nicknamed the Flour War or the Bread War. The high price of bread led to riots as peasants feared that they may starve to death. Bread was kind of the staple of the average diet within French society during this period of time for the lower class members of the Third Estate. And when bread prices skyrocketed out of control, this was a huge concern for your average person. 7, in what ways was Louis XVI's attitude towards France's economic conditions a major cause of the French Revolution? Many felt that Louis XVI was weak and decisive, refused to curtail spending or tax the First and Second Estates. So one thing you can't do is you can't continue to spend more and not raise additional revenue. And that's pretty much what he's doing. He's running up what we consider to be a budget deficit. It's the equivalency of us as individual citizens in society using our credit card all the time to buy a whole bunch of stuff we want while not getting a job or increasing the income coming into our household. Under his rule, France faced an economic crisis, and you can see Louis XVI picture there. You can see very fancy and very traditional painting of a monarchy or king at this point in time. Okay, I alluded to deficit spending a moment ago. Basically, that's when the government spends more money than it collects in taxes. Of course, this had a negative impact on France in the late 1700s. The United States today faces the biggest budget deficit in the history of all humankind at $27+ trillion. That's right, trillion with a T. Jacques Nacan. Who was he? He was the financial advisor to the king, almost like the Treasury Secretary, like the United States has today. So, an equivalent level position, very high ranking, very trusted individual within French society, and especially for King Louis XVI. He basically begged the king to stop the extravagant spending. He knows what we just discussed, the idea of deficit spending being a poor decision for any individual, and especially for a country. He wanted him to abolish tariffs on internal trade. Internal trade would be within France itself. And he advocated taxing the First and Second Estates, which is something obviously the Third Estate would be in favor of and something that could help out with the budget deficit. What was the Estates General, which you can see pictured below? This is a lawmaking body in France, which divided voting blocks into 3 equal blocks, First, Second, and Third Estate. Unfortunately, the king had not called the Estates General into session for over 175 years. That's right. 17 plus decades, almost 2 centuries without meeting and having any discussion on issues like taxation. And this predated, obviously, King Louis XVI. How did the king and the states differ over calling the States General into session? Nobility believed that calling the States General offered a chance for carrying out change and protecting their power. The king feared losing power to the nobility. Members of the Third Estate viewed this as an opportunity to potentially change things for the positive, which would be to raise taxes on the first 2 estates, which essentially would help out the Third Estate's financial situation as well. Because if they had to pay less taxes, because the First and Second Estate were now paying taxes, that could be a net positive for the Third Estate. Okay, Louis XVI asked each state to draw up a list of grievances or issues that they had with the government or with French society at the time. How did the Third Estate use the cahiers for their own benefit? Well, many of the Third Estate cahiers called for reforms such as fairer taxes, freedom of the press, and regular meetings in the States General. Also, too, during this period of time, as we look at number 13, there was many writings during this period of time. We had looked at the Enlightenment previously. We saw a lot of the great philosophers, including some of the core French philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and other French philosophers had an impact on the Third Estate. When you think about the Third Estate, they were the ones who were really reading through the ideas of the Enlightenment regarding liberty, equality, and freedom. This, of course, resonated most with the Third Estate because if you were in the First and Second Estate, you were pretty much enjoying your life at that point in time. You were relatively wealthy. You had a situation, too, where members of that class weren't paying taxes, so all their finances were in pretty good shape. So their worry level and stress level was quite a bit different than that of the Third Estate. 14, why is it important for the Third Estate to have the Estates General meet as a single body? Traditionally, each estate had met and voted separately. Each group had just one vote. Under this system, the First and the Second Estate always outvoted the Third Estate 2-1. Here's a potential idea. Would we like to tax the First and Second Estate? Let's vote on that. Well, the First and Second Estate has to vote whether or not to tax themselves. Well, if you're going to vote whether or not to tax yourself, you're going to vote no. So with a 2-1 vote advantage, there's no way for the Third Estate through the traditional means of voting and passing legislation, there's no way they could bring about any change. However, because the Third Estate had more delegates, he wanted all these states to meet in a single body with all the delegates getting a vote, which would then give the Third Estate an opportunity to potentially vote in something that might be positive for the Third Estate. 15, explain why the tennis court oath was a critical moment on the road to rebellion, and you can see it pictured below. It showed the commitment of the Third Estate and some nobility and clergy to reform. And I give you a little more background on the tennis court oath. So basically what they did is members of the Third Estate and some nobility joined them. They met at the tennis court and they refused to leave until their National Assembly and some of their ideas were recognized. They basically wanted to push forward with change. And by kind of taking this oath here, they basically refused to leave until the king would order the National Assembly and the members of the states to meet together. (16) Describe the significance of the Bastille and the events of July 14th, 1789. Well, first of all, let's take a look at the picture of the Bastille. You can see it's basically like a stone, fortress there. It had served as a prison at one point in time. At this point in time in history, it was serving as an armory, a place to store weapons. The revolutionaries, those who wanted to rise up against the king and against the government within French society, they wanted to storm the Bastille to take the weapons there, and that's what they did. And once they had their weapons, they were taken to the streets. So you can see the Bastille, too, became symbolic of royal power and abuse. The battle broke out there on July 14th, 1789, between citizens and royal troops. The revolutionaries, the people rebelling, were able to seize the fort and the weapons. And this day is remembered as Bastille Day in France, or the French Independence Day. So you think July 4th for the United States, July 14th is the recognized date for the French. You can see it's not all that far apart, 13 years and 10 days apart. So the French and American revolutions were kind of grouped together in history, especially if you're studying outside the United States and France, kind of looking at the revolutionary period of time in the 1700s. And they kind of attributed those to the United States and the French collectively. 17, why do you think violence, such as the storming of the Bastille, is usually a main component of political revolutions? Well, power is usually held by the government in the form of the military, and if the military holds power and helps that person stay in power, the only way to remove a person from power would be through some physical altercation like this, using force. People who want to remove a government from power often arm themselves and forced to use the military or their armaments to bring about change. Okay. Next, looking at the painting there, you can see that is a painting of the Great Fear. During this period of time, famine, riots, and conflict between nobility and peasants, and competition between groups for government's power led to a lot of the nobility fleeing the French countryside here. Some fled the country itself. And the Great Fear was the idea that the revolution was coming, and the nobility was not looking to get caught up in that. 19, the National Assembly. When the National Assembly abolished feudalism, the President of the Assembly declared, "We may view this moment as the dawn of a new revolution, when all the burdens weighing on the people were abolished and France was truly reborn." What do you think he meant? Well, basically, the members of the Assembly believed they had made great changes because they had given up some privileges and that they were moving forward with a greater France, one for all the people. French citizens and revolutionaries adopted a motto. Similar to the United States, we had "no taxation without representation" as the American revolutionaries' slogan. Here, the influence of the Enlightenment came true as they had liberty, fraternity, and equality. This provided a unifying message of freedom and justice for all French citizens. In what ways did the American Revolution influence the French Revolution? The American Declaration of Independence put into practice the ideals of the Enlightenment, inspiring the writings of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. So you can see some parallels here once again. 22, why would a member of the bourgeoisie distrust the clergy? The previous political and monetary power of the church was something that obviously they did not necessarily fully agree with. And then finally, the lesson reflection. What changes did the Constitution of 1791 bring to French government? Which of these changes are reflected in the goals of the Enlightenment? This established a more limited monarchy, created the new National Assembly or legislative body with elected male members, made the government smaller and more efficient, and reformed the court system. In addition, it ensured equality before the law for all male citizens. Unfortunately, women are not yet included, and ended church interference in the government. So at this point in time, that wraps up our initial look at the events leading up to and the early events of the French Revolution. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, Mr. Clark is out.